Hi, welcome back to EducateTube.com. My name is Sipsky, your host. Today I'm going to show you how to purchase a used good smartphone that you can be proud of under $300. In fact, I think the budget should be around $150 to $300 and the spec of the phones should be quite decent. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so when you're purchasing a smartphone between $150 to $300, I would say divide into two categories. Anything under $150 or less, or anything above $150 to $300. So I'm going to talk about both. Okay, let's start with the cheaper one. When you're buying a phone in general, whether it's under $150 or $300, you got to make sure that there's a warranty. Okay, now most likely these phones going to be used because you're looking for a good decent spec and it covers some type of warranty. I would say minimum 30 days because you want to test it out, especially with the battery drainage. You want to make sure that it will last at least 4 or 5 hours, right? Some of these phones, it's been used and you test, everything's working fine, you go home, you realize the battery only lasts you for 1 or 2 hours. So that's very important. So you make sure you have the warranty for at least 30 days. You test it out and you can tell them this is not a good phone because the battery drains too fast. So this is one important thing when you're buying used phone, that the battery, will, if it's used, at least have 80% of what originally contained. So you should have at least 80% of its power still left over. So let's talk about the $150 or less smartphone first. The first thing you should be looking for, of course, is the RAM. Okay, it should have a minimum of 4 gig RAM. That's very important. Anything less than that, especially when you're running Android OS 8 or 9 or above, it's gonna be quite memory intensive. So just keep that in mind. 4 gig RAM is what you want, at least. And then in terms of memory storage, minimum 32 gig hard drive or internal drive. So minimum of 32 gig internal drive. I would say 64 would be ideal. For 150 you might be able to get that. And if possible, you want to get a smartphone that allow you to remove the battery. So in case it's an older battery, even though it has ability to charge 80% of its original, you may want to get a battery in the future, maybe a year or two from now, a new one that you can replace. There are very few companies now. In fact, I don't think there is a company, the 2021 and beyond, that has a system where you can actually exchange the battery. If you know a company that does do that, a smart phone company that allow you to exchange the battery, I'm talking about phone that's being made 2021 and beyond, right? Well, the one phone that I do recommend that still have all the specs that I mentioned, the 4 gig RAM, 32 gig internal drive, I would say if possible 64, but this one has 32. The important thing about this smartphone, the LG G5, is that it actually has a replaceable battery system. So you can see here, if I take it out, there we go, you can see I can remove the battery and put it back in and replace it. That's great because you don't have to worry about buying a new smartphone. Now the OS, the Android OS is 8.0, and so it's pretty good. I would say we want to get an Android version that is compatible with most of the app, and I think the Android 8.0 is pretty much compatible with most of the app out there, and there's millions of them. Okay, so yeah, so if you want to get a phone that has 4 gig 32 gig internal drive with a removable battery, decent camera, I think that's also very important. You have these 2 cameras at the back and 1 camera in the front, then yeah, this LG 5 will fit the budget. Now I also have iPhone as well, but I'm not going to talk about that because I'm not familiar with it. I did purchase 2 for my son and my daughter. My daughter got the 5S and my son got 6S. And the minimum requirement for those 2 phones, the iPhone 5S was 64 gig, and my son had a 6S with 128 gig. Notice the hard drive memory, right? It's a lot. Internal drive is a lot, and I would recommend that with a smartphone. That's iPhone. The iPhone need a lot of internal drive because you can't put a micro SD into it. So this is why it's recommended for, especially for iPhone, it has to come with a minimum of 64 or 128 gig internal drive. Okay, so that's all I can recommend for iPhone. The one thing is make sure you get a lot of memory for the internal drive. Other than that, I don't know much about the iPhone, so that's why I'm going to focus more on the Android. Okay, so for 150 or less, you can get a 4 gig and 32 gig hard drive, internal hard drive. What about phone that is more than 150? So I would say if you're looking at a phone that is $250 to $300, then something like this one here. This is an LG G8X ThinQ. Okay, this phone actually has 6 gig RAM, and that's what I recommend. Anything above 250 to 300, you want to get a phone that has a minimum of 6-inch screen like this one here. This is 6.4, 6.8 inch, and it has 6 gig RAM. Very important. So minimum 6 gig RAM. If you're going to pay over 250, you might as well get at least 6 gig RAM and 128 gig internal drive. That's very important. Okay, so those two are essential. Minimum 6 gig RAM and 120 gig internal drive. In addition, the camera has to be great as well. So you got to have a good camera. This one, for example, has a decent camera. I wouldn't care too much about the megapixel. I think you want a good camera, a good sensor, okay, in the camera. 12 megapixel is more than adequate. I would rather have a 12 megapixel than a 48 megapixel because you have a better low light system. Okay, but anyway, this one is a 12 megapixel. I can't remember which one is the ultra wide angle and wide angle, but it's one of those. Okay, and then you also have another camera here in front, which is also pretty good as well. I can't remember the spec on this camera, but minimum, again, if you do a lot of selfie, I would say 8 or 9 megapixel. The reason why I say 8 or 9 megapixel minimum is because that's 4K standard. So if you want a 4K photo or video, then you may need a minimum of 8 or 9 megapixel front camera. Okay, that's very important, so keep that in mind. Another thing I forgot to mention in the lower model is that make sure you get a USBC connection. Okay, the reason for that is because these connections, the USBC, especially 3.1, allow you to transfer data in and out very quickly. For example, let's say you used up your internal drive, that 128 gig. Let's say you took a lot of videos and photos. You want to back that up and put it into your hard drive, like the SSD drive. Then, and you want to get a very fast input, so USB-C 3.1 or 3.0 is great. So drag and drop your file, photo or videos into that hard drive or into your computer system. It doesn't really matter, to store it away, and then now you have a fresh, clean internal drive. Now with this phone, is also ability to put in more storage, which you can. I believe this phone allow you to put the micro SD up to, I think, 2 terabyte or 1 terabyte. I can't remember exactly, but you can buy one of those, and those could be quite expensive. I wouldn't recommend you get more than 5 and 12 gig micro SD drive into this phone. You add on, remember it can get corrupted. So, I think 256 or 512 gigabytes of micro SD into this smartphone is adequate. So on top of 128 gig internal drive, you have an extra 256 or 512 gig external micro SD drive you put into this as well. So that's more than adequate. Okay, and then right now I think 256 and 512 gig micro SD is quite affordable. If you want to get one of those terabyte ones, I think it's quite expensive actually. Okay, just keep that in mind. So that's about it, other than what I mentioned previously about the battery. So when you're buying used, make sure you have a warranty of 30 days, right? Because you want to test it out to make sure that the battery actually lasts at least 80% from the original, and that's important. Otherwise, when you buy a 2 years old or 3 years old smartphone and you find out that you can't even use it for more than 2 or 3 hours, and that's not the point of getting a smartphone. You want to utilize it for at least full usage, right? At least 4 to 6 hours. I would say, these type of phone now can last for, if you use fully, right, can last for at least 6 to 8 hours. So that's what I would say when you're getting these type of phones. So again, two type, depend on your budget. $150 or less, you get one of those 4 gig RAM, 32 gig internal drive with a USB port and a good camera and a good battery system, or $250 to $300 smartphone, and that give you at least minimum of 6 gig RAM with 128 gig internal drive and a USB-C and a good camera, and also a very long-lasting battery system as well. Both must have a 30-day or more warranty, so you can test out, making sure that nothing is wrong with the phone. Okay, so that's what I would recommend. Good luck with finding a good phone. You don't need to buy the latest, greatest phone. I can tell you now, I'm very happy with my LG GX ThinQ. It's been very powerful smartphone for under $300 that I recommend for 2021 and beyond. I'm always looking for a better spec for minimal cost, but one key thing is make sure the battery lasts at least 80% of what's original, because remember, when you purchase old phones, the battery will go first. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye.